Welcome to JavaScript Lifestyle Podcast. My name is Kyle Willard. I am your host. This week we are jumping back into Skills2Know. We're still working on the front end. We're going to talk about JavaScript frameworks today. Before we do that, though, let's take a quick peek at some of the podcast's statistics. We have people from all over the world, UK, Ukraine, Spain, Finland, and of course, the beautiful United States. We've got people listening on Spotify, Anchor, on web browsers, Overcast, and other sources. We've got a start of a decent split as far as basic genders here. We got 80% male, 20% female. That's a great stat to start. And we've got listeners as young as 23 all the way up to 59 years old. To me, that's pretty awesome. That's a great start. Make sure if you are enjoying the podcast that you listen, you follow, you subscribe. If you want to help fund it, there definitely is a way to do that over at anchor.fm. We are available on 6 different platforms currently, working on getting Apple figured out, working on getting a couple more figured out. But right now we are on Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, and hoping to get more. So there's a quick insight for you, and I'm super stoked by it. Definitely make sure that if you have topics that you want to share, you want to, have me set up an interview, what have you, hop onto Anchor FM /JavaScript Lifestyles, click on the message button and leave me a voice message, and I will definitely sit down, take a listen, and see what we can figure out. Interviews are coming. Let's be real. I'm working on them. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that I want to snag are extremely busy. The summer really makes it hard to grab specific people. Welcome to life. But yeah, let's dive in, right? Let's talk about some front-end frameworks. So first off, what is a front-end framework? We've talked about vanilla JavaScript. I've talked about, pretty in depth how important it is. We poked into, the evolution of social media and the internet. So let's talk about what makes that possible. And honestly, that is a JavaScript front-end framework. So this is from MDN. This is, kind of their take on it. And I want to clarify real quick, libraries are definitely a thing. To be clear, React is a library, not a framework. I'll get into more of that later. JavaScript frameworks are an essential part of modern front-end web development, providing developers with tried and tested tools for building scalable, interactive web applications. Many modern companies use frameworks as a standard part of their tooling. So many front-end development jobs now require framework experience. In this set of articles, we are aiming to give you a comfortable starting point to help you begin learning frameworks. As an aspiring front-end developer, it can be hard to find work out where to begin. When learning frameworks, the wording's a little off there. There are so many different frameworks to choose from. Newer ones appear all the time. They mostly work in a similar way, but do some things differently, and there's specific things to be careful of about using framework. MDN, thanks for that. And this is a really good point. We're not going to dive into all of the frameworks. We're going to talk about React. We're going to talk about Angular 1, Angular 2. We're going to talk about Vue. I will mention the 4th top framework right now briefly, and that's Ember.js. I have zero real insight on it. It's not one that I've worked with. It's not one that I've looked at. But it is currently sitting number 4 in the rankings. So let's talk about the history of front-end frameworks. And this is taken to welcometothejungle.com. And this is what was said. All began 25 years ago when Brendan Ike, then a software engineer for Netscape Communications Corporation, dear God, Netscape, was tasked to develop a language on a tight schedule for the company's 2.0 beta release of its navigated browser. The language had to be lightweight yet powerful enough to enable more dynamic and interactive web pages. Faced with these constraints, Ike took inspiration from Java syntax, the object-oriented concepts of self, and some of the constructs of C, Smalltalk, Lisp, Scheme to build the JavaScript language in only this is mind-blowing. JavaScript was built in only 10 days. Today, JavaScript is supported by most browsers and employed by almost every existing website. It was the most popular language used by GitHub repository contributors in 2019, when it also became the most commonly used programming language for the 7th year in a row, according to Stack Overflow's 2019 developer survey. With the popularity of JavaScript comes the increased number of front-end frameworks, the most common of which are Angular, Ember, Preact, React, Svelte, and Vue. Based on the results from Stack Overflow's survey, the most broadly used of these frameworks include React, Angular, and Vue, with developers ranking React and Vue as two of the most loved and wanted frameworks. Svelte garnered the top spot in terms of interest in 2019 State of JavaScript report, while Ember placed highly in the awareness category and React in the satisfaction category. Yet the front-end frameworks mentioned don't make up an exhaustive list, as less popular ones are also still in use. So why are there so many front-end frameworks? Let's take a look at what's behind the rise, the advantages that having multiple frameworks can bring developers, and the issues it can cause, and what to expect in the future. Obviously, if you want the rest of that article or the MDN article or any of the sources, you are more than welcome to hop in, grab the show notes, take a look at them. They are inclusive for the most part. So yeah, there's a ton of frameworks. There really are. And using frameworks is really just a generalization, because some of these are libraries, some of these are frameworks. The biggest differentiating factor between them is frameworks tend to be a little bit more strict in the way that you're actually, made to do things. For example, Angular uses MVC wow, I'm drawing a blank today. Model view controller. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a few. But basically, frameworks are more restrictive. Libraries tend to be a little bit more flexible and open. I do want to note that I mentioned Preact. Preact is based off of React, the same way that Next.js is. All right, so let's break it down into simpler terms. The why is this: JavaScript is awesome, but there are a lot of tedious things that you had to do when developing the front end. And as humans, we like streamlining things. We like our tools. We like creating tools to make our lives easier. To that end, jQuery showed up onto the scene, was developed to handle some of the more common things when it came to making an interactive web page. Then came the start of the rise of the SPA, or single page applications. When we talk about single page applications, you need to look immediately at Facebook, Twitter, etc. Think down that line and you pretty much have it. To that end, developers started looking for better ways to make UI, UX, and front-end components. In October of 2010, AngularJS, which is now known as Angular 1, was developed by the Google team. It hit the scene with its MVC-style development pattern. MVC being Model View Controller. There is a diagram in the show notes that kind of explains that a little bit better. This is from Tutorials Point, kind of explaining it. Model View Controller, or MVC as it's popularly called, is a software design pattern for developing web applications. A model view controller pattern is made up of the following three parts: model, It is the lowest level of the pattern responsible for maintaining data. View, it is responsible for displaying all or a portion of the data to the user. And controller, it is the software code that controls the interactions between the model and the view. MVC is popular because it isolates the application logic from the user interface layer and supports separation of concerns. The controller receives all of the requests for the application and then works with the model to prepare the data needed by the view. The view then uses the data prepared by the controller to generate a final presentable response. The MVC abstraction can be graphically presented as follows. And I've got that sitting here. MVC was great for what it was. It's still around. They did do a huge revamp with Angular 2. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that Facebook hit the scene 3 years later and basically flipped everything on its head. Back in 2011, the developers of Facebook started to face some issues with code maintenance. As the Facebook ads app got an increasing number of features, the team needed more people to keep it running flawlessly. The growing number of the team members and app features slowed them down as a company. Over time, their app became difficult to handle, and they faced a lot of cascading updates. After a while, engineers at Facebook couldn't keep up with these cascading updates. Their code demanded an urgent upgrade to become more efficient. They had the model right, but they needed to do something about user experience. So Jordan Walke built a prototype that made the process more efficient. And this marks the birth of React.js. In the show notes, I do have a link to the React.js 2015 keynote. That was when they actually introduced React Native. And I want to be 1,000% clear. When it comes to front-end development, I'm a React developer. That's what I was taught. That's what I know. That's what I'm comfortable with. You know, I either run with React or I run with what's called Next.js, which was created by Vercel. It sits on top of React and does some things a little bit easier for me. So when in the future, when we do some projects, when I talk about front end projects, there's a good chance that I'm talking about a React project. But why though? Why do I like React so much? Partially because it was what I taught, partially because it's what I know, but also because I think long term, it's a far more flexible and agile than building out with something that uses MVC. I'm not a huge fan of Angular. I'm not going to lie. I'd learned it for a job, but I really do like the flexibility of the UI library that focuses, more on UI centric things and then deals with, a lot of the logic elsewhere. Another big piece is JSX, right? So JSX is an XML, HTML-like syntax used by React that extends ECMAScript, JavaScript, that XML and HTML like text can coexist with JavaScript/React code. The syntax is intended to be used by preprocessors, i.e. transpilers like Babel, to transform HTML-like text found in JavaScript files into standard JavaScript objects that a JavaScript engine will parse. Basically, by using JSX, you can write concise HTML, XML-like structures, example, DOM-like tree structures, in the same file as you write JavaScript code, and then Babel will transform these expressions into actual JavaScript code. Unlike the past, instead of putting JavaScript into HTML, JSX allows us to put HTML into JavaScript. That is from javascriptenlightenment.com. So let's take a break from that for a second, because you know what, let's dive into it. Screw it. JSX really does a lot. It makes it very easy. You really do feel like you are writing a standard HTML page and you're just sprinkling JavaScript into it, even though the file name is, .js or .jsx, or if you're using TypeScript, TS or TSX. It really did a lot. It makes it really easy to look at and understand. From a quality of life perspective, JSX was huge. Additionally, they added in hooks. A lot of frameworks are still really fighting with classes. React introduced hooks so that you could use functional components. So in other words, you're using a lot of arrow functions instead of classes, which really, it saved on code. It made it a little harder to kind of see what was going on underneath the surface, but generally it, saved you a lot of boilerplate. So let's talk about Vercel's Next.js for a minute. If I like React, why do I like Next so much? Well, Next really did kind of evolve React in a good number of ways. Here are some of the reasons that I personally love it. Out of the box, you've got image optimization. You've got server-side rendering and static site generator. You've got file system routing. So literally you can have a folder called pages, and every single file that's inside of that is going to be rendered as a route. And it has out-of-the-box TypeScript support. Do I like TypeScript? Maybe. And there's a ton more. Honestly, like, if you want to know more about Next.js, definitely, hop on the Googles, type in Next.js, go over there, take a look at what Vercel's done with that. And I think you'll be really impressed. They did a really good job with it. It's really cool. It's not perfect. There's some stuff that's a bit convoluted and annoying, but generally it's pretty rad. It basically takes React to a much easier level for a ton of people by adding a ton of features that most devs were basically begging Facebook for. So that's React, which is arguably one of the most popular UI libraries out there, aka frameworks. It is still maintained by Facebook. It is still huge. And since then, Facebook has continued to move on. You have React Native that they've worked on. And I think we're going to see some really cool things come from them. So yeah, just a year after React dropped, Vue.js hit the scene. Sorry, let's read what the show notes say. It's far more entertaining. Just a year after React dropped, Vue bounced onto the scene in February 2014 by Evan You. Vue is a bit of a new animal since it was dropped by a developer and not a major corporation. It has already taken off. It is used by Chinese giants such as Alibaba and Baidu. It is arguably rated the third most popular JavaScript framework and will likely continue to be a contender, since it is very similar and potentially easier than React in some ways. Let's talk about Vue for a minute. How insane is it that a standalone developer dropped a front-end framework and it's the third most popular framework in the world? And that's the thing to consider. I'm not talking about US numbers when I'm talking about what's popular and what's not. I'm talking about the entire internet. That is nuts. It's kind of the same thing as Node, right? Node was dropped. It's literally a JavaScript box that you can run that's written in C, so you can run JavaScript in the back end. Built by some dude, arguably one of the most popular servers on the face of the planet. Node did a ton for us, especially when it comes from a developmental standpoint. Node is insane. In order to use a lot of these frameworks, you're downloading Node, you're using NPM, which is the Node packet manager, or you're using Yarn. Let's be real. And you're using Node to run that on your local machine. Why? I don't know. Let's figure it out. Talk about that at a later date when we talk about servers and middleware. But yeah, what about the rest? There are a ton, from Gatsby to Strappy to Svelte. There are tons of different flavors, types, shapes that JavaScript front end has taken. I always encourage people to explore and play as they get into front end. I really deep dive into what they decide they want to specialize in. And that's the key, right? A lot of this podcast has been educating. It's been saying, hey, take a look at this pathway versus this pathway versus this pathway. These are skills that are in demand. React, Vue, and Angular 2. These are skills that people literally pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for. There are developers on the scene that make upwards of $500,000 a year. It's not super common. It's more common to be somewhere between, 50 and 120. But these are skills that people need. And with the experience and showing that experience through projects, through a clean portfolio, through a resume showing that you've already been on the scene for a little while, specialize in something. Find a framework or a library that's going to fit you. Get to the point where you are awesome at it. If you're using React, get to the point where you understand React, Redux, Thunk. Get to the point where you're building concise, beautiful layouts. You're building highly interactive, innovative applications, and go from there. I personally, I talk about exploring. I personally have played with Gatsby. I've played with Strappy. I've played with Svelte. I've played with React. I've played with Next.js. I want to say I've done Preact at one point. But my focus, honestly, has been, while I know much more of the front end, my focus has been more back-end centric because I really like, kind of the purest logic that you have to put into the back end. Front end is fun. I have a lot of fun doing front end stuff. I've said repeatedly, I've been doing HTML, CSS, and basic JavaScript and jQuery stuff since 2003, 2004. What's the earliest? And that was just making a website for a math teacher in high school. And then from there, I took college courses on it. And I've always enjoyed basic web development. But I'll tell you, jumping in, dealing with frameworks, dealing with JavaScript on a much larger scale, this is a whole different animal. And there's a huge amount of complexity to it that once you figure out and once you learn, it makes things really, really exciting. I remember making my first React app, which is actually, ironically enough, my portfolio that's kind of a placeholder. And I can't tell you how excited I was just to put the components together, to build something, to have something functional that I could kick on to Netlify and just show off. And I did. I showed it to everybody. I was like, oh my God, check this out. I was like a 5-year-old kid riding a bike without training wheels down the street. Like, I was super excited. Kid to candy store status. Learn, evolve, grow. That's going to be the mantra here on the show. The go hard, go home. Put the effort in, get excited. And if you're not excited, if this kind of stuff doesn't excite you, give it a little bit of time. Make sure you're learning things fairly in depth. And if over the course of a year or two, it's just not your bag, it's not your bag. Move on. I get it. Started off as a hobby. Build cool stuff. If you enjoy that, if you enjoy, the idea that you're able to create stuff, cool. If not, figure something else out. There's always other stuff to do. There's always other cool stuff to do. And if you're in college and you're getting a CS degree and you're focusing on web design and it's just not your bag, look at DevOps. Look at product management. Look at project management. Get to the point where you're gaining skills that, align, that you might enjoy more. Product managers, they get to sell stuff. They get to present stuff. They get the fun job where they're taking on a product and they're growing the base for it. So let's talk about the numbers. What is important to note is that major corporations use all three of the big dog front-end frameworks / libraries. Facebook obviously uses React and the mobile variant of React Native. Google uses Angular 2, and Vue is splattered in various places throughout the web. The landscape is extremely varied. How many times do I need to say that? And that is a great thing because as developers, we could change and evolve our tastes throughout our careers. You might love React and then scrap that and move over to a more rigid framework like Angular 2, which, just so you know, is basically just called Angular. They dropped the JS when they moved to Angular 2. So let's talk about the numbers, right? So in 2012, Angular 2 or Angular JS, so Angular 1 took off. However, in 2016, it started to drop off. Now, in 2021, and mind you, this is a percentage of the questions on Stack Overflow. Just to clarify, right? So in 2021, it's less than 1% of the questions, less than 0.5% of the questions. Okay. So in 2014, React took off. As of 2021, when this image was put out, which is from Stack Overflow, again, questions from a specific month. From the month that this was taken, React.js questions were over 5% of the questions, which, to put it in a contrast, I know we're talking about like under 10% of the questions. That's fine. You have to understand, we're talking about millions, if not billions, of questions per month, right? We're talking about tons and tons. I mean, literally, you can put questions onto Stack Overflow the same way that you can post on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Okay? You can keep putting questions up. You're going to get harassed for it if you get ridiculous about it. But at the end of the day, that's why we're talking about percentage points that are so low, right? The majority of your questions are going to be honestly more language centric. You're going to have Ruby on Rails. You're going to have Ruby questions. You're going to have JavaScript questions, C# questions. The basic languages themselves are going to be where the majority of the questions lie. So yeah, React is up just above 5%, or 5%. And Angular, or Angular 2, in 2021 is about 2% of the questions. Wait, what about Vue? Vue in 2021 is about 1% of the questions. Maybe 1.25%, somewhere around there. As you can already tell, React is stupid popular. A lot of that comes down to the ability to quickly develop with a much less rigid environment than Angular. JSX really took it to another level. Plus, it is also extremely easy to learn relative to Angular because you get to bypass a lot of the rigid environments from an MVC framework. It will continue to grow. And with libraries like Next stacking on top of vanilla React, it will be in a better place as time continues. Now, that is not to say that Angular is not a great framework. It truly is. It's just much more rigid compared to its competitors. Google does a great job with it and will continue to be a great framework to deal with. It's just going to be more rigid. It's going to have more rules. I don't talk about Vue much, and I want to be clear. I'm not ignoring it. It's just that it's not something that I talk about with people. It's not something I see a huge amount of. Eventually, I'll dive into it just to play with it because it looks cool. And it's got massive deployments from it. But it's just not something that I played with. I've looked at Angular. I poked at it, and there's a lot when you're learning React, a lot of people compare it to Angular. So you see a lot more of the code base, and you kind of see a lot more comparisons from it. But I think it's important to say, find something that you like. Find something that you enjoy. Build stuff. At the end of the day, really, especially from the self-taught perspective, build stuff. Learn the skills, build with it, get better with it, get to the point where over the course of time, you can just be in a position to showcase those skills, to show off what you've learned so you can get a job. The front-end software development landscape is varied and vast. You'll likely never learn a third of front-end libraries and frameworks. Keep playing, keep experimenting, keep evolving. Be the best that you can be at what you do. I'm literally hearing the Pokemon theme song in the back of my head right now. Be the very best. Yeah, I'm a 90s kid. What can I say? But yeah, so Learn, evolve, grow, expand. That literally, that's one of the cool things about software engineering is there's always stuff to learn. There's so many different languages. There's so many different libraries. There's so many different frameworks. And at the end of the day, you just can't get it all. So learning and evolving and getting new skills is a constant thing. A lot of the larger companies actually give you money to throw at increasing your skill set. They hook you up with access to, things like front end masters or, level up tutorials or various different sites so that you can continue to upskill so that you can do a better job for them in the future. And that's great. That's awesome. If you enjoy learning and, changing your skill set and getting to the point where, you have all these different skills and different knowledge bases, like that's awesome. So let's talk about the big question, right? I've heard this a lot from, new Lambda students that I've either mentored or are friends with my mentees or, just general people who, interact with me about software engineering. And the question that I get almost on a constant basis is, what do I learn? What should I learn? And I've got a super easy answer, guys. And I'm going to make it as clear as I can. Get on your local job boards, Indeed, Craigslist, LinkedIn, Monster, ZipRecruiter, Glassdoor. Get on your job boards. Don't click remote, which is what we all want to do anyway. Click on your city or the largest city nearby and go through and look at what those employers are asking for. If you want to relocate, just change the zip code to where you want to move to, right? Understand that there's some challenges with that as well. But look at what employers are asking for. If you want to be a front-end developer, it's pretty obvious, right? You're going to know JavaScript and it's going to be some framework. But, look at what they want. Look at what they're asking for. Build your own personal stack and then build a stack to meet the majority of the employers near you. If I was to give you a list of things that I would recommend, I would say the following. Obviously JavaScript, right? We're talking front end. We're not talking back end yet. Obviously JavaScript, but I would upskill that. I would learn TypeScript because I think the strong typing that comes with TypeScript really does improve your ability to code in a cleaner way. It prevents a lot of the errors that cost time and energy and frustration and stress. I would learn React. I think React, honestly, it's the top dog. You might as well learn it. I think on top of React, I think you learn Next, just so you have a little bit more flavor to it. It gives you React and it also gives you Next. You can point at both of them and go, hey, I know both of these. With that, learn Redux and Redux Thunk. Redux is obviously, it's a state management library. It's going to take your state from local component state into application level state. And Thunk allows you to do asynchronous actions with it. I would learn Material UI and React Strap. I would make sure that I understand, the more complex parts of React Router. I would take the time to learn CSS and JS and or styled components. I would learn Sass or less. Definitely understand CSS, for the love of God. That HTML and CSS and JavaScript for the front end, those three are automatic. So if I don't list them, that's why, because you need them regardless. I would learn Apollo Client because GraphQL honestly is pretty rad. It makes things a lot easier in a lot of different ways. There's some limitations. There's some bad pieces, but generally Apollo and GraphQL are going to be, great. Apollo Client is the front end side of that. Learn Axios. Axios is the library. It basically replaces the fetch method that's already with JavaScript. And it does a really, really good job. I love Axios. Learn some JQ. Learn some jQuery. Why not? It's been around forever. It does a great job. There's a reason it was stupid popular for years and years and years and years. Take the time to learn some history on it, do some stuff. If you nail those libraries, those scripts, those UI libraries, and the CSS preprocessors, you should be good for a front-end dev. I'd also suggest you take some time to learn about UI UX. Learning about user interface and user experience is stupid important for front-end devs because there are smaller companies that don't have UI UX developers. So that falls on the front-end developer. They give you a basic mock-up or tell you verbally what they want. You have to take that and translate it into something that's pixel perfect. And guess what? If you don't understand UI UX, you're not going to be able to do that or even improve upon it, which means you aren't the best that you can be at it. Put effort to get into UI UX design and show off pixel perfect sites that meet the sub industry that you want to hit. When I'm talking about sub industry, we're talking about, ed tech. We're talking about med tech. We're talking about, e-commerce. Like every single major industry at this point has some subset of web design that associates with it. For example, every single medical portal, every one of those got to be coded, right? Government, right? Let's talk about, like I said, I live in Oregon. Let's talk about the unemployment site in Oregon. It's all the way back in the 90s, right? It's trash. It's dead. And you can tell that because people are getting, 60, 90 days minimum wait times a lot of times for most of 2020, right? These are different sub-industries throughout it. You've got government, you've got education, you've got medical, you've got e-commerce, you've got, there's subsets of e-commerce where you have, auto dealer websites, you've got various association websites, you've got, landing pages, you've got marketing pages, you've got, it's all over the place, guys. Figure out which one you want to be in, figure out which one seems fun, and hit it hard. One thing that might be cool that, a friend of mine did, create a clone of the company site that you're applying for. Obviously, it can't be fully functional. You don't have the data. But make it as close as you can. Make it as close as you can to the functionality of their current site. You'll see Clever Programmer on Facebook. He does clones of Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and all of these, Instagram. And these are really big things. But that shows off UI UX a little bit. It shows off your ability to get it pixel perfect. And it shows that you're determined. And so what if you have to hard code some data or use lorem ipsum? That's fine. You showed that you could take their site and recreate it. And by doing that, you're not cloning what everybody else is. You're cloning the specific site for the company that you're trying to get in with. If it is a more popular site like Netflix and Facebook, etc., do another big site that hasn't been done. And that's all the show notes. I'm looking at the time here. We're a little fast. I talk a little quickly. Thank God that you can slow me down if you need to with the play speed. But let's be real, guys. There is a ton to learn, and there's no specific set right pathway to get there. And I'm gonna keep saying that. The choice is yours, but I encourage you, as you're learning, as you're becoming a developer, take the time and energy to get good at everything that you're learning. There are different courses and different, people that say that you can be a developer in 6 months. Sure. That's what a lot of boot camps do. 9 to 5, 8 to 5, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 6 months. You get the basic core skills and they spit you out with an endorsement and you can go get a job. That's the majority of the boot camps is, somewhere between 6 and 9 months. Well, guess what? They're going to touch the surface of it. It is up to you to dive deeper than the surface and get more extreme, hardcore pieces of the puzzle. I have a friend who honestly is as good or better than I am at development who doesn't know what, useref is or didn't. And I explained it to him and he's like, wait, that's cool. I didn't know what that was because it's not taught, because it's more an advanced thing. Right. And that's kind of a, left field example. But at the end of the day, like, software developers need to understand the majority of the frameworks, the majority of the languages that they're interacting with. They need to understand what they're working with, and they need to be able to use those skills. And if you don't know something, guess what? There's documentation there, which is why boot camps, do what they do. They can get away with just teaching you the bare bones basics and show you where the documentation is, show you where Stack Overflow is, teach you how to use Google appropriately. And at the end of the day, technically you can muddle along and figure it out. But you don't want to be an average developer. You don't. You want to be the guy that actually gets to, implement cool features into the websites that you're making. Let's say you got hired at Facebook. Do you want to be the guy that's just, converting all of the code base from class components to, stateful functional components with useState and useEffect? No! You want to be the guy who's making the next like button. You want to be the guy that gets to add cool features. You want to be the guy that created the private message or the Facebook Messenger theming, right? You want to be that guy. You don't want to be the guy just doing QA. You don't want to be the guy just doing tests or code reviews. And you may be that guy regardless of what you do. But if you show you are that good, at the end of the day, there's a better chance that you're going to be able to do the fun stuff. Right? It's up to you how you go. It always is going to be. And I truly, as part of, as part of the vision for JavaScript lifestyles, I don't want to dictate to you what to learn. I want to give you information, and I want you to take that information, put some time and research into it, and decide for you what the best path, the best stuff to learn is. I want to give you tools for you to be able to learn on your own, with your own understanding, targeting the things that you need to learn for you. Because let's be real, different markets, different industry use different things. It may be that in your market, Python or C# are super, super popular, but Node is basically non-existent. Well, guess what? Then Node isn't for you if you want to stay in your area. Because as much as employers try to cater to their employees, their employees have to try and cater to the companies that they want to get hired at. Data science guys, they all basically learn Python. Why? Because it's what's generally used for algorithms, right? So it's stupid popular and stupid reasonable for a data scientist to know Python inside and out. Guess what? There's going to be portions of it they don't have a freaking clue, right? There's a good chance that most of the data scientists using Python don't deal with Django at all, or Flask. They don't deal with the web. They may deal with some with the web scraping, but generally they're probably just dealing with algorithms. They're not doing a lot of the web stuff. That's the gap that you can fill, right? Learn, evolve, and keep growing as a person and as a developer. I cannot hammer it enough. Every single week when I sit down and I put together the show notes for this podcast, every single time, it's 4 to 6 hours of me going through Google, looking at different resources, and then slapping stuff into Notion to have a concise, built out grouping of topics. I can do a good chunk of it off the cuff, But the reason that I take the time to add sourcing, the reason that I take the time to try and be as concise as I can, the reason that I give myself a general script to follow is to try and make the show more concise. But by doing that, it also does something else. It means that someone who's hearing impaired, who wants to try and go through the stuff that we're talking about, they might not get the entire show, but they're going to get the majority of it. You know, but the other piece is that I get to learn along the way. You know, like I said, honestly, I've heard about Ember.js a couple times, but it is in one ear and out the other. Next, React, Angular, those are the ones that I have any sort of bearing for. All right, guys, we're starting to hit that time. I'm going to close it out by saying this. Thank you for everybody who's listening. Thank you for everybody who's following. Any support for the show, liking, sharing, you know, tossing us up on Facebook, tossing us up on Twitter, you know, just blasting us across the world to your friends and families and those that are interested in learning software engineering and development. You know, I definitely appreciate it. I'm hoping to continue to grow and evolve. The end goal long term, you know, is to have a podcast that you guys can come to learn stuff on a daily basis. We're starting with the basic stuff just to start from the bottom and climb our way up. Now, next week, we are going to do an episode about the state of Lambda School. You know, I've written some stuff on Medium. You know, I've kind of kept people updated about the struggles I've hit. I've talked about the good. I've talked about the bad. I've talked about changes that I would make. I'm going to go a little more in depth on that. It might be a bit of a longer episode just because of the fact that there's a lot to cover and talk about, because I'm actually going to condense stuff all the way back from Unit 1 all the way through to Unit 4. I might have a guest on for at least part of it. We'll see. It depends on scheduling. But at the end of the day, we're going to try and be as comprehensive as we can. I will warn folks, the YouTube uploading is going a bit slow just because of scheduling issues. But I want to make sure that every week you have a new podcast to listen to. So we're going to get all the podcasts up. And then over the course of the next month or so, I'll get all of them up to speed on YouTube, and then start growing the YouTube channel with additional content, etc. But I'll tell you, it's a lot of work. If anybody's looking into doing podcasting or being a YouTuber or creating content, bro, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Anyway, thank you for listening to the show. We will see you next week. But in the meantime, learn, grow, evolve, go hard. You know you don't want to go home, so just go hard. We'll see you next week.